Hey, Andrew here from Pottery, and I'm here with Peter, one of our potters at Pottery, and he hand makes all our pottery. And in this video, we really want to talk about like your journey in pottery and how you started in pottery.
Well, I started when I was about 12 years old. My parents sent me to a boarding school where you literally got fed on how well you played rugby union, and I was a kid that made puppets. And I built puppet theatres and put on puppet shows for the local kids and charged them sixpence, that's how old I am, to come and see the show. And here I am at this boarding school, a big boy for first form, and everyone was expecting me to be playing rugby union. And I grew up playing Aussie rules. And but it was at the time that the government said to the private schools, if you want the government money, you have to follow our curriculum. So suddenly this school, based totally around sport, had to do things like art and music. Yeah. And the art teacher they employed happened to be a potter. And so the other thing that happens at boarding school, back then, I don't know if it happens now, is we studied. So you did your schoolwork, yeah, and then you had another 5 hours study after schoolwork. So with a few breaks in between. So I would disappear into the pottery, and I'd be sitting there in the dark making pots on the wheel, so the prefects didn't see the lights on and go, "What are you doing in here?" Because when I was over in the science lab weighing out glaze materials and finding out about glazes, that seemed to be okay because you were in the science lab. That was study, but working in the pottery wasn't. And by the time I left fourth form, I could throw a pretty decent pot, and I look back at some of those pots now, which they've still got at the school, and I go, yeah, I'd employ that potter. He's not a bad thrower. And but I left the boarding school. I went back to my hometown of Broken Hill, and Pro Heart was a really good help to me. So I went back to Broken Hill, where I built a kiln, and all the local potters came around to see the gas kiln that this young fellow had built. And when the gas guy installed it, he said, "Don't turn that pressure above 5." So I didn't, and the kiln never got to temperature. But Pro Heart was a great help to me. I went round and met him. He was a lovely bloke. Just gave me kiln shelves, pyrometers.
Yeah, got you started. You really got you started.
Well, not so much started, but gave me the confidence to know that you could make a living as an artist.
Yes.
So when I left Broken Hill, I just travelled around for a while, and I eventually got back to where I went to boarding school, and there was a community centre setting up a pottery. Mm-hmm. So I said, yeah, I know a bit about pottery. So I jumped in there, and I spent about 5 years playing around with the community centre and the community centre pottery and teaching kids and so forth, and that was fun. But I came up to Brisbane and I met an American potter named Carl McConnell, and I just loved his pots. And he was one of the fathers of pottery in Australia. He settled here after World War II, and I just said to him, "Can I come and work here?" And by that stage, he was pretty much retired. Yeah. So I came up to Brisbane, and I would go around to his place. I got a job as a labourer working concreting, yep, and I would go around to his place on weekends. And I think that's the only time he actually worked, is when I went around there. But I worked with him for a little while, and then it was sort of time to move on. And I went down to the Gold Coast, where one of his former apprentices had a job. And he said to me, "Oh, go and see the Americans up at Beachmont." So I went up to Beach Mountain. Carl had actually helped me organise a job in Japan, and that was the zenith of pottery at the time, was to go to Japan. Where if you worked in Japan, you were a real potter. Yeah. So I intended to do that, and I went and worked in this production pottery to earn enough money to go to Japan. Yeah. And really, the production pottery really honed my skills. All I did was sit on the wheel, make pots all day, and I would move up to 3/4 of a tonne of clay in one day, every day. And so at the time up at Beachmont, this young girl came down to the pottery from her grandma's place and was making a few pots, and she said to me, "Have you met my mum? She's 32. She wasn't. And the next day I get a phone call from her grandmother inviting me to dinner, and well, 30-something years later, we're married, mortgaged and multiplied. So,
so you basically found your wife through pottery as well?
I found my wife through pottery as well, even though she's a midwife. But so needless to say, I never went to Japan. Yep. And then I left Beach Mountain Pottery, and I set up my own studio. And after a while, I ended up employing people, and I had 9 staff at one stage and quite a large production of domestic ware. And I just sort of went, wow, I'm not really making pots anymore. I'm just a supervisor and a salesman. And so I wound that back, and we moved to a property right up the top of Beechmont, and I set up an art studio. Yep. And I got really involved in crystalline glazes and special effects glazes, which is my main thing. So I've been doing the crystalline glazes for 30 odd years, and I was introduced to those through Ted Seckham and David Oswald. And David approached me to do a major project because I had a 100 cubic foot top hat kiln. And so David and I did this project together of making these big pots for a high rise on the Gold Coast. Okay. And he had the technology for the crystal glazes, which I obviously learnt. And then I think David's teaching now, he's not potting anymore, but yeah, I continued on with it, and it took me in a new direction, and I started making art pots, and I dealt with about 30 galleries around Australia for 25 years. And the GFC, the 2010 financial crisis, sort of put pay to that. Yep. And so I went off and did driving jobs for a little while. And then I came back to Pottery, and through another friend who was making these water purifiers. Yep. I asked him if he would market my crystalline glaze water purifiers, which he did. And they went okay, but the water purifying market and the crystalline glaze was a totally different area of business. And so the crystalline ones are beautiful. They're probably a little bit too upmarket to be a production line. Yep. And yeah, so then one day I got a phone call from Rod from my water filters, and he asked me if I'd supply them, and I said, well, I'd be actually interested in supplying you with your own product. And out of that came Filter-Roo.
And we're very happy to be able to have you through pots for us as well, or filters. Yep. Because we think Filter-Roo could be a household name here in Australia. So we're very excited to work with you and build the Filter-Roo.
Build the Filter-Roo. Filter-Roo.
All right, well, thank you, Peter, for sitting down.
Thank you.
And that's the story of the Filter-Roo.
Ta-da.